Napa Valley is the United States' most famous winemaking region, and the most famous grape in Napa Valley is Cabernet Sauvignon. But what would happen if Napa stopped making Cab? This isn't even a totally hypothetical question, but to dive into why that might even happen and what the implications would be for American winemaking and wine all over the world, we've got to dive into a bit of Napa's history. I'm Meg, an American wine expert on a mission to uncover the secret side of American wine and explore the places and stories that don't typically get talked about. And it's impossible to talk about American wine without talking about Napa Valley. So Napa Valley was actually America's second AVA, or official American viticultural area, to be defined by the government. The first AVA is in Missouri, but that's a story for another day. Napa Valley was defined as an AVA in 1981, but way before that, in 1861, the very first commercial winery popped up in Napa Valley, and that winery was founded by a guy named Charles Krug. And Napa Valley just happens to be really great for growing grapes. The climate's perfect, the soil's amazing, everything kind of works together to be a great climate to grow grapes like Cabernet Sauvignon. And so after Charles Krug established his winery, wineries were popping up all over the area. And it was becoming pretty commercially successful, and then that stupid little thing called Prohibition happened. And when Prohibition happened, most of the wineries in Napa Valley, like most of the United States, closed down. So before Prohibition, there were about 140 wineries in Napa Valley. After Prohibition, though, the numbers were much smaller. Different sources say different things, but the number is probably between about 20 and 60 wineries. Today, there are over 500 commercial wineries in Napa, and even more brands of wines that claim Napa Valley as their home. Cabernet Sauvignon is the most famous grape in Napa Valley, but anyone who's picked up a bottle of Cab knows that these bottles don't go cheap. Today, I've got a bottle from Baldacci, and this Cabernet Sauvignon is from the Stag's Leap district. It's a 2012, and this bottle goes for about $150. And that's a pretty typical bottle if you visit Napa. But why is Napa Valley so famous, and why is it so freaking expensive? Even when Napa Valley was making incredible wines, the historic hubs of winemaking in Europe, especially in France, were still the most popular places and the most well-known regions. But in 1976, there was a little event that happened that we now call the Judgment of Paris. It happened at the US Bicentennial in 1976 when a British wine merchant by the name Stephen Spurrier organized an event where he had some judges blind taste wine from California and compare it to France. And so these judges didn't know the wine they were tasting when they were tasting it. But they were given a wine and they scored them. And at the end of the day, two wineries from California beat out the wines from France. And this moment wasn't really meant to happen, but it ended up rocking the world. So Stag's Leap in California had a Cabernet Sauvignon that beat out some of the best Cabernet Sauvignon from the Bordeaux region of France. And Chateau Montelena had a Chardonnay that beat some of the best Chardonnay from the Burgundy region in France. And this moment kind of put Napa Valley on the map. It wasn't the first time that Napa's wines were discovered, but it was the first time that the world really started to pay attention to Napa. And so as Napa Valley became more and more famous, more people wanted to get in on the Napa action. One of the things about Napa Valley is that it's actually not that big. So Napa Valley is only about 30 miles long, and it's between 1 and 5 miles wide, depending on where you are in the valley. Just to put this into perspective, the Bordeaux region in France is about 6 times larger than Napa Valley. And because of the mountains and some regulations that define where the county is and where the AVA is, it's not really able to expand. And so anytime you have a situation where there's limited supply and you've got a lot of demand for a product, of course prices are going to go up. In fact, today, some of the prime land in regions within Napa Valley, sub-AVAs Oakville and Rutherford, land can go for over $300,000 an acre. And just to further put that into perspective, an acre of vineyards can produce about 2,000 bottles of wine, depending on the density of the grapes and the yield for that year. The average winery in America makes about 400,000 bottles of wine a year. And a winery that is considered limited production produces under 12,000 bottles a year. So 2,000 bottles is not that much. But the price of the land itself isn't the only contributing factor to why Napa is so expensive. There's a few other things. Napa Valley is truly a valley that sits between the mountain ranges, the Mayacamas Mountains and the Vaca Range. And so when you have a valley and vineyards are planted on the slopes of these hills and mountains, it is impossible, or at least very difficult, to get machines up onto those slopes to pick the grapes. A lot of wineries that really focus on quality winemaking also will choose to hand harvest, even if they're able to use machines, just because hand harvesters are better able to sort through to pick out the good berries and toss the rotten ones. So these vineyards are being hand harvested, which means real humans are out in them picking the berries at just the right moment. And that labor can be really expensive. So now you have land that's expensive and labor that's expensive, but the winemaking itself is also expensive. So Cabernet Sauvignon is a really big, bold, tannic grape. And so with the winemaking process, a lot of times winemakers will choose to barrel age the wine. This adds in flavors like spice and vanilla, which are classic to the Cabernet Sauvignon flavor profile, but aging them in barrels takes time. And the barrels themselves are also expensive. A French oak barrel can cost $1,000, even up to $4,000 or more. And each barrel only holds about 300 bottles worth of wine. And so going back to our previous winery example, even if you're only making 2,000 bottles from that 1 acre of land, you're needing at least 7 barrels to do that. And it's not even like you put it in the barrel and it's ready right away. Many Napa Cabs are aged up to 24 months in these barrels. So that's 2 years that this wine is just sitting in these expensive barrels before you're even able to sell it. So it's no wonder that these bottles are costing a lot. But one of the truly cool things about Napa Valley is, even though we picture these big brand names that we see in the stores and in the news, the prestigious bottles, 95% of the wineries in Napa Valley are actually family owned. And a majority of them are small production, producing less than 10,000 cases a year. So in order for these wineries to survive in this very expensive winemaking place, the bottles are going to demand a higher price. But the wine that you buy from Napa is truly amazing, and so it's probably worth it if you want a bottle that's going to be great for aging. This one here is a 2012, so it's been hanging out for a while. But I kind of feel like today would be a good day to open it. We're just gonna pray the cork doesn't get stuck here. Oh, perfect. That smells so good. So this wine here is from the Stag's Leap district in Napa Valley. And that's not to be confused with the winery or wineries with the name Stag's Leap. So Stag's Leap is a sub-AVA of Napa Valley. So like I said, Napa Valley is not huge and Napa itself is an AVA, but then within Napa, there are 17 different AVAs. And typically the AVAs that are on the southern side of Napa Valley are going to be cooler because there are winds from San Pablo Bay that blow in and cool off those vineyards. And the vineyards or the AVAs on the northern side of Napa Valley are going to be warmer. But then there's also some differences between where the AVAs sit within the valley floor or the 2 mountain ranges on either side. So even though we think of Napa Valley Cab as one flavor, there's a lot of different flavors that pop up depending on where in Napa Valley the vineyards are from. So some of the more famous AVAs that have a typical flavor are Rutherford. Sometimes people talk about Rutherford Dust. This is a dusty taste that can sometimes be in the wine. Howell Mountain is known to have really strong, intense Napa Cab. And Stag's Leap here, because it's on the southern side, is going to get that cooling breeze, but it's also on the valley floor, which means it's going to be really warm. So it's going to have a really nice balance of power, but also elegance. So this one here, because it is older, the tannins are a lot more integrated. You want to let your cabs age because if they're too young, the tannins are going to be really astringent. They're going to be really in your face. These are nice and sort of blended in with the wine, but this is beautiful here. Blackberry, cocoa, some spice and vanilla from French oak aging. And there's still nice acid on this because of that cooling winds from San Pablo Bay. I love Napa Cab, and so do a lot of people, but I mentioned at the beginning of the video, what would happen if Napa stopped making Cab? And the reason I ask that is because the climate in Napa Valley historically has been beautiful for Cab. The soils, the sun, the temperature. But recently, climate change has been making an impact on Napa Valley. UC Davis dedicates a lot of resources to researching and measuring winemaking, particularly in California and in Napa. And they've reported that it's getting warmer, and this is impacting the grapes. It means that the wine that's being produced is going to be harvested earlier. It's going to be higher in sugar, which means it's going to be higher in alcohol. It's going to be harder for the wine to preserve the acidity because it needs to cool down for wines to maintain their acidity. There's a lot of science that goes into that, and when certain aspects of the science that are outside of winemakers and grape growers' control, like the weather, start happening, it means there could be a problem in the future. So right now, some of the grape varieties that have historically been grown in Napa, like Pinot Noir, Merlot, Chardonnay, they're struggling. They're ending up flat or jammy or just not balanced like they were in the past when it would cool down more. Currently, Cabernet can still handle the heat, but there is some question about the potential future of Napa Valley if even Cabernet is going to start to struggle if trends continue the way they are. And there are some grape varieties that are still doing really well that are meant to handle the heat. Grape varieties like Petit Syrah, Mourvedre, Tempranillo, anything that's from Southern Rhone or is from Spain, they're used to that heat. That's where these grapes grew up. They're thriving right now, but that's not the majority of vineyards in Napa Valley. The majority of the vineyards are Cabernet Sauvignon because that's what Napa's known for. That's what sells. But what many people may not realize is that if there truly is a crisis and Cabernet cannot simply thrive and make quality wine in Napa, it's not like you can just plant new vines and start over. Typically, from when you plant the vines, it takes 3 to 5 years for the first harvest and even longer for really exceptional harvest. So what are grape growers and winemakers to do? Is the right move to start to plant these heat-resistant vines now to mitigate risk and hopefully prevent crisis in the future, knowing that they'll be making less money on that wine now? Or is it to continue making Cabernet Sauvignon and hope that the trajectory doesn't stay the way it has been and the temperatures bounce back, or they're able to find other methods to keep the Cabernet Sauvignon fresh and balanced? I don't have the answer for this, and only the future will tell what will actually happen in Napa with Cabernet Sauvignon. But this problem is not limited to Napa. Many regions around the US and around the globe are experiencing climate pressures as things change and the grapes that once were thriving are struggling a bit more. This is the downside. The opportunity means that there's new grape varieties that are maybe not quite as popular now that are going to start popping up because they are able to adapt to the climate and still produce fresh styles of wine in greater heat. But to bring it back to Napa, Napa's not just expensive because it's Napa. It's a combination of the history, the land, the grape varieties, and the farming. It's not a question of whether this bottle here is worth $125 because it's absolutely delicious. The question is really, will Napa be producing bottles like this in the future? I hope the answer is yes. If you learned something about Napa Valley today, or you're interested in the conversation on American wine, be sure to like and subscribe. There's way more to explore across the entire US when it comes to wine. So let's go on this journey together. Until next time, cheers!